The night was heavy with silence, the kind that presses against the chest and makes the air feel too thick to breathe. Michael stumbled through the old family attic, his hands trembling as he brushed away dust. He muttered, "Why does this place feel alive with shadows?" The flickering bulb above cast fractured light across relics of his forgotten childhood. Each object seemed to whisper secrets he wasn't ready to hear. His fingers found a small wooden box buried beneath broken frames. The box was locked, but time had worn its hinges weak. Michael pried it open, and inside was a single letter, sealed with faded wax. His breath caught, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Father!" He had believed his father abandoned him, yet the letter bore his name in familiar handwriting. The attic groaned as if the house itself recoiled from the truth waiting within. His pulse thundered in his ears, a scream clawed at his throat, but all he could do was sink to his knees and whisper, "What have I been blind to all these years?" Michael sat on the attic floor, his body trembling as though the air itself carried a weight pressing down. He tore the envelope open, the paper crackling with age. His father's handwriting spilled across the page like a ghostly voice returned from the grave. His lips moved as he whispered the words, "To my son, who must one day see the truth." Each sentence struck him like thunder, his heart pounding louder than the silence around him. Memories of nights spent wondering why he was abandoned surged back with violent clarity. His eyes blurred with tears as he muttered, "Why didn't you tell me?" The attic groaned again, and the letter seemed to whisper in a voice only he could hear. The silence became unbearable, his breathing shallow, yet he forced himself to keep reading, knowing that every word cut deeper than the last. What had been a night of restless wandering had become the moment that shattered his world forever. The words of the letter spoke of choices his father had made, of sacrifices hidden in silence. Michael read of debts owed not in money, but in secrets and blood. His chest tightened as each revelation clawed into him. He muttered, "This can't be real," though the handwriting was undeniably his father's. Every corner of the attic seemed to close in, as though the house itself wanted to swallow him whole. His palms grew slick, and the paper slipped in his grip. He remembered his father's laugh, a sound that once felt like safety, but now returned like a haunting echo. Michael's voice cracked as he whispered, "You carried this alone." The attic bulb flickered again, plunging the room into brief darkness, and his heart lurched. For the first time in years, he felt like a child again, small, powerless, and desperate to know the truth buried in shadows. The letter hinted at betrayal from someone close, a shadow that had shaped Michael's childhood without his knowing. He shook his head violently, whispering, "Who did this to us?" His throat tightened as his father's words described trust broken and love twisted. Michael slammed his fist against the wooden floor, splinters biting into his skin, yet he barely noticed. The attic felt alive with whispers, as though every memory had awoken to accuse him of ignorance. His chest burned as grief mixed with rage, and he muttered, "I was blind." The letter slipped from his hands, drifting to the floor like a fallen leaf. He pressed his palms against his eyes, as if he could block out the truth. But the words were carved into his mind now, unshakable, merciless, and eternal. He realized he could never return to the man he was before opening that box. Michael rose to his feet unsteadily, the attic spinning around him. He staggered toward the narrow window, his reflection fractured in the dusty glass. His face looked older, worn by grief, as though he had aged years in minutes. He whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore." Outside, the night pressed close, storm clouds swallowing the moon. Lightning flared, throwing his shadow across the cluttered attic wall. He clutched the letter against his chest, every heartbeat a war drum. His jaw clenched, his eyes burning with new fire. He muttered, "If this is the truth, I'll face it." The attic no longer felt like a prison of silence, but the chamber where his journey began. His reflection stared back, not as the man he was, but as someone reborn through anguish. He turned from the window and with trembling resolve whispered, This is where it starts. Michael woke the next morning with the letter still clutched against his chest, the acid's chill seeping into his bones. Sunlight crept weakly through cracks in the roof, as if reluctant to expose his shattered world. He whispered, "It wasn't abandonment, it was sacrifice." His voice trembled, but there was an edge of awakening. Every corner of the attic now felt alive with memories, childhood toys, broken photo frames, echoes of laughter. Michael touched one frame, glass cracked across a faded family photo. "I thought you left because I wasn't enough," he muttered. His throat tightened as the truth cut deeper. His father hadn't vanished from indifference, but from burdens Michael never knew existed. The weight of guilt bore down on him, guilt for carrying resentment instead of understanding. Yet beneath that guilt burned something fragile, hope. He realized this truth didn't just reshape the past, it demanded he redefine himself. Later that day, Michael wandered into the small kitchen of the house, his hands shaking as he poured water into a cracked glass. The silence of the place felt unbearable, as though every wall carried his father's absence. He muttered, "All this time I blamed you." The glass slipped slightly in his hand, clinking against the counter, but he held on. Memories of dinners left unfinished, birthdays celebrated alone, and unanswered questions pressed against his heart. He stared at his reflection in the cloudy glass, whispering, "Was it pain or fear that kept you away?" The question lingered like smoke. His chest ached, but the ache no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like the wound of someone finally seeing what was hidden. He pressed the glass to his lips and closed his eyes, realizing he could no longer escape the truth. His journey had already begun, and there was no turning back. By evening, Michael walked through the empty street outside, his father's letter folded carefully in his pocket. The air was heavy with the smell of rain, clouds pressing low against the rooftops. He muttered, "If this truth is mine, I must carry it forward." His steps echoed against cracked pavement, each one feeling heavier than the last. He remembered being a boy, searching these same streets for his father, hoping for a glimpse, but finding only shadows. Now those shadows seemed to follow again, whispering doubts into his ear. He clenched his fists and lifted his head, eyes burning with unspoken resolve. "I'll find what you wanted me to see," he said firmly, though his voice cracked. The wind picked up, scattering leaves around him like restless spirits. For the first time, Michael didn't feel abandoned. He felt chosen to bear the truth his father left behind. Michael sat on a park bench as twilight deepened, the folded letter resting in his lap. Children's laughter drifted from the distance, piercing his heart with memories of what was lost. He whispered, "I never saw your silence as love." His chest tightened, but this time tears fell freely without shame. He remembered his father's calloused hands lifting him as a child, strong yet gentle, before those hands vanished into absence. The park lights flickered on, casting a pale glow that felt both comforting and haunting. Michael ran his fingers over the letter, whispering, "You wanted me to grow strong by walking without you." The realization struck like lightning. His pain had been both a wound and a forge. He exhaled shakily, and for the first time the grief didn't crush him. It carried him toward something larger, something waiting to be discovered. That night, Michael returned home and stood before a mirror, the letter held tightly in one hand. His reflection stared back with weary eyes, haunted but alive. He whispered, "I thought I was broken, but I was blind." The words hung heavy in the stale air. He studied the lines of his face, the weight of years spent in anger and longing. The man in the mirror was not who he remembered. He looked older, yet steadier, as though truth had carved something stronger within him. Michael pressed the letter to his chest, whispering, "You didn't abandon me. You gave me a choice." His reflection seemed to shift, not in form but in meaning, showing him not as a victim but as a man standing on the edge of transformation. He closed his eyes, and for the first time his breath came steady. The journey had truly begun. Michael returned to the attic days later, but this time the silence no longer felt empty. It felt like judgment. He whispered, "You gave me truth but not peace." His father's words haunted him with every breath, echoing louder than the creaks of the floorboards. He sat cross-legged, letter open on his lap, scanning the lines again and again, as though repetition could soften their meaning. "You hid me from betrayal, but you left me drowning in questions," he muttered bitterly. His hands clenched the paper until it nearly tore. Memories of friendships broken, trust stolen, and nights of hollow waiting stabbed at his chest. The attic shadows shifted as if forming shapes of accusation. Michael whispered, "Am I cursed to carry your wounds, you?" The words felt like a confession and a sentence. He realized truth was not a gift, it was a weapon cutting deeper with every passing moment. Later that night, Michael confronted David, his childhood friend, whose face carried the same years of scars and silence. The air was tense as they stood on the porch, rain falling in steady sheets. Michael said, "You knew something, didn't you?" David's jaw tightened, eyes darting away. The silence spoke louder than denial. Anger surged through Michael, a storm he could no longer contain. "You let me believe he abandoned me," he hissed. David finally met his gaze, shame flickering across his face. "It wasn't mine to tell," he muttered. Michael's fists trembled, but it wasn't violence he sought, it was truth. Lightning lit the sky, and for a moment, the years of friendship felt like ashes in the rain. Michael whispered, "You betrayed me by keeping quiet." His voice cracked, but his resolve hardened. The wound of trust once broken felt irreparable, and silence between them screamed louder than words. Michael wandered alone through the cemetery where his father was buried, the storm easing into mist. His footsteps echoed against wet stone paths. He stopped before the gravestone, fingers tracing the carved name. His chest tightened as he muttered, "You left me with nothing but silence." His voice cracked, caught between accusation and grief. He dropped to his knees, tears mixing with the rain on the grass. "Why didn't you trust me with the truth?" he whispered, his breath trembling. The weight of the unanswered questions pressed harder than the rain-soaked earth beneath him. His body shook as rage warred with sorrow until he could barely breathe. Michael whispered, "You were my father, not my ghost." In that moment, the grave felt like both a barrier and a mirror, reflecting the man he was becoming, angry, searching, desperate for meaning that the dead could never give back. Michael returned home and stared at the mirror, his reflection fractured by a crack across the glass. His face looked haunted, eyes hollow, as if a stranger stared back. He whispered, "I see you. The shadow of me." The voice inside his mind grew louder, whispering of failures, of every moment he chose anger over forgiveness. "You're not enough," the shadow taunted, though no one else was in the room. Michael pressed his hands against the mirror, trembling as he whispered, "I won't be your prisoner." His body shook violently, rage bubbling from deep within, yet beneath the anger flickered fear. His reflection seemed to smirk back at him, eyes darker than his own. He whispered, "You were the weight I must carry." The mirror fogged with his breath, and in that fog he saw both his enemy and himself. The war inside had finally erupted into a visible battlefield. Michael's sidekick Daniel appeared at his door the next morning, a loyal friend who carried his own quiet scars. Michael slumped against the wall, letter clenched tightly in his hand. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You don't have to face this alone." Michael's eyes brimmed with defiance. "This is my burden," he muttered. Daniel shook his head, his voice steady. Even burdens weigh less when carried together. Michael's chest tightened, torn between resisting help and craving it. The silence between them was heavy, but filled with unspoken loyalty. Daniel's presence was like a lantern in the darkness, steady and patient. Michael exhaled sharply, whispering, "Then walk with me." His words weren't surrender. They were an acknowledgement of strength found in brotherhood. For the first time, the weight in his chest shifted, not gone, but lighter, carried by two hearts instead of one. Michael sat with Daniel in the living room, The letter spread open across the table between them. The storm outside rattled the windows, but inside the air was heavier still. Daniel read the words slowly, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. Michael whispered, "It wasn't abandonment, it was protection." His voice trembled, disbelief wrapped in grief. Daniel looked up, eyes searching, and said, "Your father didn't leave you. He sacrificed everything to shield you." Michael's chest tightened as fragments of his past suddenly shifted into focus, like shards of glass rearranging into a single image. His father hadn't been the ghost of betrayal, but the sentinel of a secret war. Michael muttered, "All these years, I hated the man who saved me." His words cracked under the weight of revelation. The storm thundered again, as though the truth itself had been waiting for this moment to break open. The letter revealed a name Michael had never spoken aloud, a man tied to his father's betrayal. His stomach twisted as he whispered, "Richard Hale." The name tasted like ash. Daniel leaned back stunned. "That was your father's closest friend," he said quietly. Michael's mind spun as childhood memories replayed. The smiles, the handshakes, the quiet glances that now reeked of deception. "He was family," Michael muttered bitterly. The words on the page revealed that Richard had been the betrayer, selling trust for survival. Michael's chest burned, and his fists trembled with rage. "All this time, I blamed my father when the knife was in another man's hand." Daniel placed a hand on the table, steady but silent. Michael's world crumbled and rebuilt itself in the same breath. The truth was clear. His father had vanished not to abandon him but to shield him from a traitor within their circle. Michael drove through the rain-slick streets, headlights cutting through fog, as his mind replayed the revelation. His grip on the wheel was tight, his jaw locked. "Richard Hale," he muttered, the name echoing like a curse. The letter had given him an address, an old warehouse on the edge of town. His father's words spoke of unfinished business, of betrayal left unresolved. Michael's pulse thundered with both fear and fury. He whispered, "If you destroyed him, then I'll face him now." The rain intensified, drumming against the windshield like war drums. Every streetlight blurred in the storm, but his path was clear. His father's ghost no longer haunted him. It guided him forward. Michael's reflection in the rearview mirror looked older, harder, shaped by a fire he could no longer extinguish. The truth had become a burden, but it was also a map leading him straight into the heart of darkness. The warehouse loomed before him, its rusted metal doors rattling in the storm. Michael stepped out of the car, rain soaking his clothes instantly. He muttered, "This is where the truth waits." His fists clenched around the letter, now wrinkled and wet. The air smelled of iron and decay, a place where secrets lingered too long. He pushed the doors open, the echo of metal scraping like a scream into the night. Inside, shadows clung to every corner, broken crates scattered across the floor. Michael whispered, "Father, what did you face here?" His voice cracked, but his resolve steadied. This was more than a building. It was a graveyard of trust, a monument to betrayal. The storm roared against the metal roof, but inside, the silence was deafening. Michael felt the weight of footsteps that weren't his own, ghosts of battles that had shaped his father's fate. Inside the warehouse, Michael found a trunk covered in dust, its lock broken long ago. He knelt, pushing it open with shaking hands. Inside lay photographs, his father standing with Richard Hale, smiling, unaware of the betrayal to come. Michael's throat tightened. "You smiled with the man who destroyed us," he whispered bitterly. Among the photos, a journal lay waiting, pages yellowed, but words still alive. He opened it, eyes scanning lines filled with fear, sacrifice, and warnings. His father had written, "One day my son will see this. One day he will understand." Tears blurred Michael's vision as he whispered, "You knew I'd find you here." The storm outside cracked with thunder, echoing the revelation inside. His father hadn't left a story of failure, he had left a map of courage. And now, Michael knew, his journey wasn't about surviving abandonment. It was about finishing what his father began. Michael stood in the warehouse center, journal clutched in one hand, photographs scattered across the floor. The storm rattled the metal walls like war drums, every crash of thunder pushing his resolve deeper. He whispered, "This is where it ends." His reflection in a shard of broken glass stared back at him, eyes hollow, yet burning with fire. The shadow of his doubt whispered in his mind, reminding him of weakness, but he clenched his jaw and shouted, "I'm not your prisoner anymore." The echo reverberated, swallowed by the cavernous space. His fists trembled, and his body felt fragile, but his spirit surged with defiance. Michael sank to his knees, breath ragged, the journal pressed against his chest like a shield. His father's words pulsed within him like blood. This was no longer about grief. It was about transformation. The storm outside was chaos, but within him, something had begun to break free. The door groaned open, and Richard Hale emerged from the shadows, older now, face lined with years of deceit. His eyes were cold, his voice sharper than the rain outside. "So the boy finally learns the truth." Michael's chest tightened as fury boiled. "You stole everything," he hissed, fists trembling. Richard smirked, stepping closer, his coat dripping with rain. "Your father chose silence. That silence was my victory." The words cut like knives, but Michael steadied himself. "No," he said firmly, voice cracking with power. "My father chose sacrifice, not silence." Richard's smirk faltered for a moment, but he masked it with scorn. The storm thundered in perfect rhythm with Michael's heartbeat. This wasn't just confrontation, it was judgment. Every scar, every question, every night of emptiness had led to this face-to-face reckoning. Michael realized that to break free, he had to fight not only Richard, but the fear Richard represented. The confrontation ignited like fire. Michael stepped closer, eyes blazing, journal still in hand. "You betrayed my father, you betrayed me," he spat, each word trembling with decades of grief. Richard's face hardened, his voice icy. "Your father was weak, Michael. He chose principles over survival." Michael's throat burned as he shouted, "No, he chose love over fear." The warehouse echoed with the clash of voices, like steel grinding against steel. Michael felt the shadow of doubt rise within him, whispering that he was still powerless, still broken. His knees wavered, but then Daniel appeared in the doorway, his voice steady. "You are not alone." Michael steadied, fire rekindled by loyalty beside him. He turned back to Richard, breath ragged, but spirit unbroken. This wasn't just his father's battle anymore, it was his. He roared, "Your lies end here." The warehouse trembled, storm and soul colliding in furious harmony. Richard lunged forward, slamming his hand against Michael's chest, pushing him back into crates. Michael gasped, but his grip on the journal never loosened. Richard sneered, "You are nothing like him." Michael's vision blurred, pain slicing through him, but he forced himself to rise. His chest heaved, every muscle screaming, yet his spirit refused to collapse. "I am his son," he growled through clenched teeth. Richard's eyes narrowed, fury boiling in them. Michael raised the journal like a weapon, not of violence, but of truth. "This is your failure," he said, voice rising above the storm's roar. Lightning flared through the shattered windows, illuminating Michael's battered form standing tall. The warehouse felt like an arena of judgment, every shadow watching. For the first time, Richard's expression faltered, not at Michael's strength, but at his defiance. Michael whispered fiercely, "I will not be broken by you." The storm reached its peak as Michael and Richard faced one another in silence, the air thick with judgment. Michael's eyes burned with fire but not hatred, resolve. He said, "You thrived on fear, but I will live by truth." Richard's sneer cracked, revealing a flicker of weakness, but Michael did not relent. "My father gave his life to protect me from you, and I will not waste that gift." The words rang like thunder, filling the cavernous space. Michael stepped forward, each stride steady, each breath a declaration of freedom. Richard stumbled back not from force but from the weight of a man who refused to bend. Michael's voice rose in final defiance. "This ends now, not with your lies but with my choice." Lightning struck outside, flooding the warehouse in blinding white. In that moment, Michael stood not as a broken son, but as a man reborn in fire. The warehouse lay silent after Richard's retreat, the storm fading into distant rumbles. Michael stood alone, his chest heaving, journal still clutched in his hand. The silence was no longer suffocating. It was cleansing. He whispered, "Father, I carried your burden, but now I carry my own." His knees weakened, and he collapsed onto the cold concrete floor, tears streaming freely. For the first time, the tears were not of rage, but release. The ghosts that haunted him seemed to scatter into the shadows, leaving him with clarity instead of torment. Michael closed his eyes and pressed the journal against his heart. "You didn't abandon me," he whispered softly. "You gave me the strength to find myself." The storm outside finally broke into soft rain, like a gentle applause for the man who had survived his darkest night. Daniel entered quietly, his clothes still damp from the storm. He found Michael kneeling, shoulders shaking. Daniel placed a steady hand on his back and said softly, "It's over." Michael's voice cracked as he whispered, "No, it's only beginning." Daniel's eyes filled with respect as he realized Michael was no longer the broken man he once carried. Michael turned, his face streaked with tears but lit with something new, resolve. "I finally understand him," he muttered. "And I finally understand myself." Daniel squeezed his shoulder gently. The silence between them filled not with grief, but brotherhood. For years, Michael had hidden behind walls of anger, but tonight those walls had collapsed. Now he stood among the ruins, not as a victim, but as someone reborn from ashes. The warehouse, once a place of betrayal, had become a sanctuary of truth. Later that morning, Michael stood outside the warehouse, breathing in the crisp air. The storm had passed, leaving the sky painted with streaks of pale light. He muttered, "Every ending is a beginning." His fingers ran along the journal's worn cover, no longer gripping it as a shield, but holding it like a compass. His reflection in a puddle on the ground showed a man weathered by grief, but not destroyed. He whispered, "I know who I am now." The air smelled of wet earth, a reminder that even storms nourish life. Michael turned and looked toward the horizon, the city beyond bathed in morning light. The path forward was uncertain, but he no longer feared uncertainty. He carried not the silence of abandonment, but the wisdom of survival. The pain remained, but it no longer defined him, it shaped him. Michael returned home and placed the journal carefully on the same attic floor where he first found the letter. He whispered, "The place of my pain is now the place of my truth." The attic was no longer suffocating, it felt alive with light streaming through cracks in the roof. Dust danced like tiny sparks, transforming the once oppressive silence into something sacred. Michael knelt, closing his eyes, and whispered, "I forgive you." The words freed him more than anger ever had. The shadows of doubt and resentment faded, leaving space for peace. He touched the floor gently, as though acknowledging both the boy who suffered here and the man who had grown from it. The attic, once a prison of memory, had become a temple of transformation. That evening, Michael stood on a hill overlooking the city, the journal tucked safely under his arm. The skyline shimmered beneath fading sunlight, a blend of endings and beginnings. He whispered, "You showed me wisdom, Father, not with answers, but with silence." His chest rose with steady breath, no longer burdened by guilt. For the first time he felt light, not because the pain had vanished, but because he had learned to carry it differently. Daniel joined him at his side, both of them gazing into the horizon. Michael said quietly, "The past no longer owns me. The future is mine to choose." As night fell, the first stars flickered into view, shining against the darkness. In those stars, Michael no longer saw abandonment. He saw guidance. His journey had been forged in pain, but it ended with a fragile, unbreakable peace. Michael walked through the quiet cemetery once more, dawn painting the world in muted gold. He stopped before his father's grave, the journal clutched under his arm. His voice trembled, but there was no bitterness now. I came here once with questions, but today I bring answers. He traced the letters of his father's name, his touch gentle, no longer demanding. His chest rose steadily as he whispered, "You taught me without words, you shaped me with silence." The grave, once a wound, now felt like a bond between generations. Michael's tears fell, but they were not heavy. They were cleansing. "I will carry you not as absence but as guidance," he said firmly. The morning light broke across the stones, illuminating his figure as if blessing his vow. For the first time the weight he carried no longer crushed him. It lifted him. Michael walked back into the city, streets quiet under the early morning sky. The same cracked pavement that once felt like chains now stretched ahead like a path of freedom. He whispered, "The past no longer binds me." His steps were steady, his gaze forward, not searching for shadows but for horizons. Passing familiar corners filled with memories, he no longer felt haunted. Instead, he carried them like stones in a foundation. "You built me to survive storms," he muttered, thinking of his father. A child ran past him laughing, and Michael smiled faintly, realizing the world had always carried both pain and joy. The city lights dimmed as dawn brightened, and for the first time in years, the streets did not feel empty. They felt alive, waiting for him to walk them as the man he had become. Back at home, Michael sat at the table where Daniel waited, 2 cups of coffee steaming between them. Daniel studied him silently, noticing the change in his eyes. Michael said softly, "I thought I was broken, but I was only unfinished." Daniel smiled faintly, his voice steady. "Now you've begun again." The silence between them felt warm, not heavy, filled with unspoken trust. Michael picked up the journal, running his hand along its battered cover, and placed it in the center of the table. "This isn't just his story, it's ours," he said. Daniel nodded, his expression proud, his presence a steady reminder of loyalty. The room, once dim with grief, now felt alive with light seeping through the curtains. Michael realized his journey was not about ending sorrow, it was about learning to carry it alongside love. That evening, Michael climbed the hill overlooking the city once more, the same place where he had once felt lost. The skyline shimmered with lights as night embraced the horizon. He whispered, "The same view but a different man." The stars emerged one by one, their glow steady above the restless city. Michael breathed deeply, the cool air filling his lungs with something like hope. "Father, your silence was never abandonment, it was an invitation," he said softly. He closed his eyes, hearing the echo of storms past, but now they sounded like a song of resilience. The night felt endless, yet instead of fear, he felt possibility. The city below pulsed with life, and he no longer felt like a shadow among it, he felt part of it. Michael stood alone in his room, staring into the cracked mirror that once reflected only his doubt. Now his reflection met him steady and unflinching. He whispered, "You are no longer a shadow, you are free." The crack in the glass, once a symbol of brokenness, now looked like a mark of survival. Michael smiled faintly, the first true smile in years. He pressed the journal against his chest, then placed it gently on the desk, no longer needing to hold it for strength. His father's voice no longer lingered as absence, it lingered as presence, woven into every heartbeat. Michael turned away from the mirror, walking toward the door. His final words hung in the quiet. "I am no longer the boy searching for a father, I am the man who found himself."